Okay, and we are live. Welcome to what number is this? Number 8. This is our 8th event at the first ever NVO Litfest. Karibuni sana. My name is Wanjeri Koinange. I am one of the founders of Book Bank Trust, and I'm honored to be your host for a tiny little bit this afternoon here in Nairobi. NVO Litfest is presented by Book Bank, and we have anchored this festival in public libraries. You can see some public libraries behind me actually today. And these libraries are available for you to tour as well throughout the course of the festival weekend. So hurry up and go on to Airbnb and book some library tours. Bookings close in a few hours for the last tours, which run tomorrow. So do go online and book your tour. If you're new to our work here at Book Bank, please visit our website at www.bookbank.org and explore some of our visions and dreams for libraries in Nairobi. For now, before we start, some house rules. This is a pre-recorded event. Nevertheless, please keep your microphones muted for the duration of the event. We're also streaming live on Facebook. So if you have any comments, want to show us some love, please head on over to Facebook, also on Instagram and on LinkedIn and on Twitter. We are at the Book Bank on all of those platforms, and our hashtag for the festival is #NBO Litfest. Also, please tell your friends, we have a whole day of programming tomorrow, music, conversations, laughter, art. So please come and tell your friends to join as well. Everything is free and everything is online, as you would already know, because you guys are here. We'd also love your feedback. There's gonna be polls popping up onto your screen at different intervals throughout the festival. There's probably one coming onto your screen soon asking you how you found us. So let us know what we need to keep doing and what we need to improve. We love to receive your feedback. Before I hand over to Wanjeri, who is our incredible moderator for this session, I would like to thank the people behind this magic. Our funders, the Sharjah World Book Capital, the Sigrid Rousing Trust, and the Embassy of the Netherlands in Nairobi. Thank you so much for putting your money behind this vision. We are very grateful. There's also lots of organizations that have helped us shape the festival. So thank you to the British Council, to Glasgow Women's Library, Sahifa Journal, and Baraza Media Lab. Asanteni sana. We are truly grateful for your input. And there's lots of worker bees in the background, making sure all of these Zooms coordinate. And on that note, we'd like to apologize for the late start of this session. People say that in Nairobi, when it rains, everything goes crazy, and you can see my window, it is raining outside. So it looks like our virtual festival wasn't saved from the gremlins. So sorry for the late start, but there's lots of people who are working their butts off to get this festival broadcast to you live. So thank you to all of you. It has been an honor to bring this one in for Nairobi. So without much further ado, let me introduce you to your host. Let me shift my scripts over here. Wanjeri Gakuru is somebody who I think is a complete trailblazer, and with such passion and energy and focus for the literary scene here in Nairobi and elsewhere. She is a freelance journalist, an essayist, and filmmaker who is invested in gender equality and social justice. Wanjeri has been published widely at the Elephant LA Times Magazine, CNN, the Sunday Times, but she's also co-written an award-winning feature film, several of them actually, including the internationally acclaimed Supermodo film, which came out in 2018 and which was a huge hit at our libraries in 2019 when we screened it for the kiddies at Kaloleni Library. I think maybe like 500 kids came out to watch Supermodo. That's how huge that film is. Supermodo has received 44 awards and nominations and was Kenya's submission in the Best Foreign Language category at the 91st Academy Awards. Wanjeri has also written, directed, and produced short films that have screened at local and international festivals such as Accra Animation Film Festival in Ghana, Encounters Short Film Festival in the UK, and others. She is in the writers' rooms for several high-quality Kenyan TV drama series, such as Country Queen, co-produced by Art, and currently in production. She is also the Partnerships Director of Rogue Film Society, RFS, which is a collective of multi-talented African filmmakers and thespians working across platforms in film, TV, theater, and advertising. Wanjeri is incredible. You're gonna love this conversation. Thank you for joining us. Karibuni sana, and enjoy.
Good afternoon. My name is Wanjeri Gakuru. I am a freelance journalist, essayist, and filmmaker. Today, I have the privilege and fantastic good fortune to be speaking to the award-winning and internationally best-selling South African author, Lauren Beukes. The title of our conversation is Goals, How Did I Do It? And truly, Lauren is the best person to be speaking this. She has written 5 critically acclaimed high-concept novels, Moxieland, Zoo City, The Shining Girls, Broken Monsters, and Afterland, which is her most recent piece of work. She has also written a short story collection called Slipping and a pop history book called Maverick, Extraordinary Women from South Africa's Past. These books have been published in at least 24 countries. So like when we say international, we mean international for real. As well as been adapted for film and TV. And beyond that, she's also a comics writer, a screenwriter, a journalist, and a documentary maker. So basically, it's like the CV of my dreams, like what I will grow up to be one day. George R.R. Martin has called her a major, major talent. And the people who knew that I was going to be having this conversation immediately gushed over your work. So we are really all of us in for a treat. So please welcome Lauren. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much, Wanjeri. I've also been completely like freaking out about how amazing your CV is and all your accomplishments. And I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you.
And I love it.
I know, right? But you know what? It's the panini. Thanks, panini. The wonderful thing is that we both got the memo to color our hair. So I think we got that. We're on the same page, obviously. But let's begin. So I have been spending the last week just kind of like deep dive in all things Lauren. And I noticed whenever you talk about your writing journey, you start with yourself at 5 years and you have this beautiful view and you talk about that's the point in your life when you discovered that writing could be a thing, you know, making up stories and kind of making a living off of it. And I wonder, you know, what other kind of adventures or worlds where you can be immersed in as a child, and if writing truly was the only option on your plate, or were there other things you were considering?
Well, it just felt like, you know, when I found out that being a writer was a job that you could have, that you get paid to make up stories, and that Enid Blyton, who wrote The Famous Five and The Secret Seven and all that stuff, which I think a lot of us grew up with in the Commonwealth and around Africa, she made £1 million from her writing. And I was like, it's not just a job, it's a good job. And of course, the reality is for most people, you know, you're lucky if you kind of scrape by as a writer. But I never wanted to be anything else. I wanted to tell stories. I think stories is a way of exploring other worlds, exploring other people. It's this incredible empathy engine. And stories really allow us to be so much more than we are already. And I think what's amazing about stories is they're kind of like a virus, if you'll forgive the metaphor. Because they do affect you and they live inside you and you carry the stories with you. And I think for me, one of the best things about storytelling and writing books is the relationship that readers have with the books. And sometimes people mistake that for a relationship with me. They've read my books, so they think now we're besties. And I have to, no, we're besties. But the fact is that, you know, when you read a book, you are bringing all of yourself to the book. And actually the relationship is between you and the story and not you and the writer. So the fact that I've created these things that go out beyond me and live inside other people in a way that I actually can't imagine and has very little to do with me is so exciting and amazing. And especially when the stories mean something to people, when they really connect with them and there's something that speaks to who they are.
Well, what's really interesting as well is that with all of that knowledge and that understanding of the beauty of words and story, the first book that you publish is creative nonfiction. It's Maverick, Extraordinary Women from South Africa's Past, a book that casts light on the fascinating lives of some of South Africa's most famous women. So why was it important to start there with real stories?
Because it was a commission. You know, I think I think all of us, you know, it's not like Europe, it's not like America. If you're African based, you've got to hustle. And you're probably, you know, I think the reason so many of us have done so many different things is because we've had to. I've had to be a journalist and I've had to work in TV. And yeah, it was literally a commission. It fell into my lap. It was actually supposed to go to someone else. I was struggling to write Moxieland at the time, and suddenly I was offered this job where I could like write a book about interesting South African women. They gave me free range to choose whoever I wanted. So it went from Daisy to Melka, who is this white serial killer in the 1930s who killed 2 husbands and her adult son and maybe 14 other people, through to amazing, you know, inspirational women like Helen Joseph and sorry. Oh God, I've forgotten her name. I'm a terrible person. I have not looked at the book in ages.
It's okay, that one.
No, Lillian Ngoyi, who's also an amazing activist, led the March on Parliament. Brenda Fassie, who like came out as bisexual at a time that just wasn't acceptable. And I think writing through those stories and experiencing these whole lives and seeing the complexities of these lives, from Kurtoa Iefa, who was a translator for the Khoi and the Dutch back in the day, through to someone like Daisy DeMelko or Brenda Fassie, really showed me how to build a character and how much of a deep life is there. And journalism was the same. It really taught me how to write because I was interviewing people and I was getting outside my own head. And that was so critical for me.
Yeah, which is great because you literally just pulled the words from my mouth. You talked about how journalism got you out of your head and into those others. And I wonder how much of a gift you realize this has been and continues to be for you, and how has it manifested in your writing? And have you ever turned a subject for a story into a character?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've definitely used inspiring adventures that I've had. You know, I was interviewing at one point a group of ex-Mkhonto Sizwe and ex-APLA veterans. So they were part of the struggle against apartheid. But now they couldn't get a job. They came back, they couldn't complete matric, and they became basically vigilantes. And they would offer justice for money. And I absolutely used kind of a lot of the dialogue. I'm going to change the people, but I used a lot of the dialogue from that journalism experience and used it in a short story, which actually becomes about a woman kind of standing up to them. And yeah, but journalism is this backstage pass to the world. And, you know, when I was 5 and I was imagining being a writer, you know, it was like, you know, I think it was that colonial dream, like in your garden cottage, like making up, like typing it all the time, making up these amazing fantasy worlds. And actually the real world is more surprising and more inventive. Other people's minds are incredible. And being able to do journalism and like go and interview people and spend time with them and talk to them about the things that are important. You find out how people think about the world and how they talk about the world and how they speak differently. And dialogue is one of my favorite things to write. And I think that's because I spent so much time as a journalist transcribing hours and hours and hours of interview and really listening to how people speak. And and that was just magnificent, actually.
Yeah, that's really wonderful because I also work as a journalist, and I always feel like my job is to be a cheerleader of the people that I meet, because more often than not, I'm getting assignments in the arts and culture world where it's focused on this person who's doing an amazing thing. So there you are, just kind of like praising them and saying, oh, they're so amazing. And that's really wonderful because most of the time, especially if they're really wonderful, they're really introspective about their work. They know why they're doing it. It's not just art for art's sake. There's something behind it. And having somebody maybe dedicating their entire life to a particular thing, or meeting them at a point in life where they're trying something new, is so exciting because you're not, you're not specialized in that way, but here is this gift that they're giving you, sharing the deep self. And because everything doesn't transfer into the story because of word count or whatever, you live with that recording of someone's on your phone or some text somewhere, and it's something to refer to. So I'm completely with you there, but like kind of being in that space. Are you ever worried, because this worries me sometimes, feeling as if I'm kind of mining someone's life and kind of like extracting and kind of going away? How do you watch out not to do that?
So the only time I've ever really based a character on someone was the character in Broken Monsters, which is a book about art and toxic masculinity and wanting to be seen, but there's also kind of this weird dream manifesting in Detroit. It's a very strange book. I can't begin to describe it. But I went to Detroit, and this is where my journalism background is such a gift, because I do a lot of research, and it's actually the most fun part, because let's face it, writing is hard and it's lonely and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Yes. But going on adventures and talking to people and kind of really getting a sense of a place, because place is very important to me in my books. So going to Detroit and hanging out with artists and breaking into abandoned buildings and talking to, police detectives who are wearing alligator skin shoes and taking me around the precinct. you know, and talking to me about what their Detroit looks like, and actually getting kind of under the skin of the place, and also trying to figure out, you know, because we have this idea, I think, of Detroit the same way we do of many ruined cities. You know, I think people have this idea about Hillbrow in Johannesburg as well. It's just, it's this ruined place, but it's not. There are ruins, but there's also this incredible vibrancy and life. So I knew that I also wanted to look at all aspects of the city, because it's kind of a noir. So I also wanted to look at homelessness in the city, where so many people have lost their homes. So I spent a day working in a local church, and like working in the soup kitchen, and then going and sitting down with people and talking to them after I'd finished serving them with the other volunteers, and telling them why I was there and talking to them about their stories. And there was this one guy, James, who just had the most remarkable story about his life. And there were details you just couldn't make up. The way he talked about, you know, how they used to break into abandoned buildings and then kind of steal electricity, but then put up cheap curtains to make it look like they'd actually moved in. And he called himself like a thug nerd. And, you know, he carried like a little knife inside his walking stick, and his mother had been murdered, and he'd been involved in like trying to get vengeance. And it was just this incredible story. And I really wanted to use parts of his story in my book. So I paid him for it. So I paid him $500 at the time. And then when the book came out, I gave him another $5,000. But they're not the same person, but they share a backstory. So my character is actually quite different to James. And you couldn't say that it's based on James, but they have the same history. Yeah. So I'm generally pretty careful about that. And I always tell people what I'm doing. I don't ever, you know, if I'm interviewing people for a book, I tell them I'm interviewing them for the book. And people love it. It's different to being a journalist, because as a journalist, people are a bit worried about what you're going to do. But for a book, they're kind of like looking over your shoulder, what you're writing down, and they want you to like write about their life and the weird adventures they've had. And the stories people tell you is stuff that you can never make up. I mean, one police detective was telling me about going to this basement of like an old house, and it was just full of doll heads. And I'm like, that's such a weird, creepy detail. My God.
Well, I was saying that I've had that comics say that all the time, that people come up to them and give them jokes. So I guess there's something about knowing a storyteller. And maybe it also goes to this idea of wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard. And if somebody is paying attention, then you're like, okay, let me tell somebody a story of my life. But you mentioned that a place is very important to you. Why is that? And how do you evoke that in your writing?
Sorry, I just want to go back to what you were saying about being seen. And I think that is our job as storytellers, is to try and see the world as, you know, as acutely as we can, and then kind of represent it. And that's going to be filtered through your own experience, but we are observers. And I think that also means that for a lot of storytellers and people in the arts in general, because we're so open and we're so sensitive, I think that can also lead to mental health problems. So that's actually been a really important thing for me, is like learning about my own mental health and going to therapy and, you know, being on anti-anxiety medication. And I think that rawness of spirit, which makes you a decent artist, can also turn around and hurt you. So you do have to be very careful about that kind of thing. Sorry, your question was?
No. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that, because it's true. I mean, it makes you in a sense an empath. And as much as you're taking in, it does drain you. So I think it's very important also to talk about that. And I'm going to ask you something about that a little bit.
Cool.
For sharing that as well. But I'd ask about place. You mentioned that place is important for you.
Right.
And I was wondering, how do you, once you walk this space and smell things and see things and, you know, experience things, how do you bring that into the story? And why is it so important to do it right?
So I think I'm very interested in cities, and, you know, I've written about Detroit and Joburg and Cape Town and Chicago, but really Detroit and Chicago are a way of writing about Johannesburg again, because, you know, Chicago has an incredibly high corruption rate, and the apartheid government went to Chicago to learn how to do segregation better, which is you drive a highway through the slums so people can't organize. Like lots of, you know, so a lot of stuff which felt very familiar. And I think there's a lot of, whenever I'm writing about America, I'm really writing about South Africa, and I'm finding kind of those connections. But it is so important for me to have that rich detail, because apparently a novel can't be all dialogue.
Who knew? Oh my goodness.
So, so going to a place and I take lots of photographs on my cell phone. I'll record interviews. And then, when I'm writing about it again, I'll be looking at those photographs. And they're just, again, details you couldn't make up. Going into Detroit's, we went into this old abandoned theater and the kind of paint's peeling off the walls and the curtains are rotting. And like one red velvet chair has been pulled out of its row like a rotten tooth. And there are black squirrels scampering around. That kind of the overgrown weeds, and there's kind of dust filtering down through the beams of sunlight, and you're like, oh, that's so beautiful, and you're like, wait, that's probably die at 50. But it's a texture, and it just and it's so important to me not just to go to a place and like kind of play tourist, and I appreciate that I'm really just kind of dropping in and trying to absorb as much as possible. Yeah. But I check it with people afterwards, so I ask people from those places to kind of really reread it for me and go over it, and it's also people's stories that I love connecting with, and I love being surprised. I had incredible experience in Haiti where I went in 2015, and it's finally making an appearance in my new novel. And I got to Haiti and I was like, I'm not going to do voodoo because it's so over sensationalized, and I don't want to be that Westerner who comes in with these kind of like, ooh, voodoo is so creepy and weird. But as soon as I got there, I realized that actually voodoo is so much part of the culture, the same way sangomas and nyangas are in South Africa, for example, and traditional healers. And it's like, I can't write about this without actually including this, but I need to do it in a way that's really respectful and true and authentic. So I found a really good Hongan, and I went to go and see him. And, we walk into his basement, which is clearly the area where they do rituals. There's dirt on the floor and like colored powder, which they use to summon the lower by drawing symbols. And there's this young woman drawing weird symbols on the blackboard, and a young man watching her and like kind of correcting her. We go upstairs and we have like a 2-hour-long interview, and he agrees to give me a reading, which he normally wouldn't do for a blonde, which is a white person. But because I'm from Africa, he's like, okay, you count, it's fine. And he gives me this wonderful reading, and it's so cool. And as we're leaving, and again, just beautiful details, which again, I couldn't have made up, the bottle of rum that he pours out for the lower, and tangles of bells and nails together. There's the skull of his mambo, the woman who taught him voodoo, and her head is on a plate in the corner.
Like a shark head? What? Okay. You're really in it. You're like committed.
But I said to him, I was like, what's going to happen with your head when you die? Is it the people you teach voodoo to? Is it going to be passed down? He's like, no, my kids aren't down with it. They want my head. So as we're leaving, and he's shown me like the symbols that you draw for the verve to summon the lower. And as we're leaving, I say to him, I'm like, oh, but what was that young woman doing? Was she learning like voodoo? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, she was drawing all the weird symbols on the blackboard. And he's like, what are you talking about? That wasn't voodoo. That was her physics homework. And it was just so perfect because I'd gone in there with my ridiculous assumptions and just being completely debunked. And again, like, it's not just kind of the ideas that people have, the fact that voodoo and physics homework can coexist in the same space is, I think, what's so important. And I think that is very much where I'm coming from as an African, as a South African, is coming from a country where, traditional beliefs and religion and modern sciences can all coexist and not necessarily contradict each other. So that was actually a really important moment for me, and also a great story.
Which is wonderful, because I had a question about research and whether at this point you've kind of like found your rhythm. Is there like a process now? Do you know the tools you need to have in your bag? How long? And also, like, what do you know now when to stop? When is too much research? When is the time for writing?
Well, apparently I have like, I don't know, I've got a kid, and apparently I've got to come back and like look after her and stuff.
Oh gosh.
And, like pay my rent and look after my cats. Because if I could just spend all the time researching and traveling, that would be ideal. But I can't, and actually it's been difficult with this book because normally I go to a place to write about it. And my new book, which I've just finished, it's called Bridge. I'm rewriting it at the moment. It's very stressful. I couldn't, part of it is set in Portland, and I've been to Portland once, and I couldn't go. So I've been watching movies, and I've been like doing Google Street View and talking to friends who live there. But, I was saying to my publisher, I'm like, look, maybe I just need to set this book in Cape Town, because I can write about Cape Town. And I know the places where they would go to, like the queer bar that they would go. And my publisher was like, listen, Lauren, I know how important your research is to you, But for this book, you're going to have to do what other writers do.
Mm.
You're going to have to make it up.
Oh God, how terrifying.
I know, totally, absolutely. But that's fine. I just based the queer bar on the Raptor room in Cape Town, and it's fine. You know, I've just stolen the details. And I've got people in Portland who can read it for me and check it over. And actually the place isn't as important to this book as it has been to others.
Yeah. Well, I get you. I always say this thing that it's easier for me to embellish the truth than to tell outright lies. And that's why it's easier for me to be like in creative nonfiction, because I feel like I'm borrowing from something real and adding some kind of little magic on top. Well,
Absolutely.
I think it's a good time to have a little break and hear you read. Especially wonderful because this is the 10-year anniversary of Zoo Girls, or Zoo City rather. So please tell us a little bit about the book, and then maybe if you want to tell us what the context of what you're going to read, but basically feel free, share with the audience.
Okay, great. So Zoo, all my books are very weird. The only one,
which is wonderful and how it should be. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So, like you're supposed to have an elevator pitch for your book, and the only book I have an elevator pitch for is The Shining Girls, which is a time-traveling serial killer and the survivor who turns the hunt around. But all my other books are impossible to explain. But Zoo City is my second novel. It's my favorite book. It's my favorite of all my children, I think, because it just meant so much to me at the time. And it's really a love letter to Johannesburg. So it's about a young woman who has a sloth on her back and the magical ability to find lost things. But she's also, she's a recovering drug addict, and she was involved in her brother's murder by accident, and she's living with a lot of guilt. And it's really about how you deal with guilt, how you deal with the things which you've done and the things which have been done to you. And she gets asked to find a missing pop star. So I'm just going to read from the opening chapter. In Zoo City, it's impolite to ask. Morning light, the sulfur color of the mine dumps, seeps across Johannesburg's skyline and sears through my window. My own personal bat signal, or a reminder that I really need to get curtains. Shielding my eyes, morning has broken and there is no picking up the pieces. I yank back the sheets and peel out of bed. Benoit doesn't so much as stir, with only his calloused feet sticking out from under the duvet like knots of driftwood. Feet like that, they tell a story. They say he walked all the way from Kinshasa with his mongoose strapped to his chest. The mongoose in question is curled up like a furry comma on my laptop, the glow of the LED throbbing under his nose. Let's just say, like he doesn't know that my computer is out of bounds. Let's just say I'm precious about my work. Let's just say it's not entirely legal. I take hold of the laptop on either side and gently tilt it over the edge of my desk. At 30 degrees, the mongoose starts sliding down the front of the laptop. He wakes with a start, ticky-taby claws scrabbling for purchase. As he starts to fall, he contorts in the air and manages to land feet first. Hunching his stripy shoulders, he hisses at me, teeth bared. I hiss back. The mongoose realizes he has urgent flea bites to attend to. Leaving the mongoose to scroll at its flank, I duck under one of the loops of rope hanging from the ceiling, the closest I can get to providing authentic Amazon jungle vibes, and pad over the rotten linoleum to the cupboard. Calling it a cupboard is a tad optimistic, like calling this dank room with its precariously canted floor and intermittent plumbing an apartment is optimistic. The cupboard is not much more than an open box with a piece of fabric pinned across it to keep the dust off my clothes, and Sloth, of course. As I pull back the gaudy sunflower print, Sloth blinks up at me sleepily from his roost, like a misshapen fur coat between the wire hangers. He's not good at mornings. There's a mossy reek that clings to his fur and his claws, but it's earthy and clean compared to the choke of stewing garbage and black mold floating up the stairwell. Elysium Heights was condemned years ago. I reach past him to pull out my vintage navy dress with a white collar, match it up with jeans and slops, and finish it off with a lime green scarf over the little dreadlock twists that conveniently hide the mangled wreckage of my left ear. Let's call it Grace Kelly does Sailor Moon. This is not so much a comment on my style as a comment on my budget. I was always more of an outrageously expensive indie boutique kind of girl. But that was FL, former life. Come on, buddy, I say to Sloth. Don't want to keep the clients waiting. He gives a sharp sneeze of disapproval and extends his long, downy arms. He clambers onto my back, fussing and shifting before he finally settles. I used to get impatient, but this has become an old routine for the pair of us. It's because I haven't had my caffeine fix yet that it takes a little while for the repetitive squitching sound to penetrate. The mongoose is pawing at the front door with a single-minded devotion. I oblige, shunting back the double deadbolt and clicking open the padlock, which is engraved with magic, supposedly designed to keep out those with a shavi for slipping through locked doors. At the first crack, the mongoose nudges up between my ankles and trots down the passage towards the communal litter tray. It's easy to find. It's the smelliest place in the building. You should really get a cat flap. Benoit is awake at last, propped up on one elbow, squinting at me from under the shade of his fingers, because the glare bouncing off Ponty Tower has shifted across to his side of the bed. Why? I say, propping the door open with my foot for the mongoose's imminent return. You moving in? Is that an invitation? Don't get comfortable is all I'm saying. Ah, but is that all you're saying? And don't get smart either. Don't worry, Sherry Nine Guy. Your bed is far too lumpy to get comfortable. He stretches lazily, revealing the mapwork of scars over his shoulders, the plasticky burnt skin that burns down his throat and his chest. He only ever calls me my love in Lingala, which makes it easier to disregard.
Oh, I love it, love it, love it. Thank you so much. Okay. So that was a setup, because the next thing I'm going to ask you is, so your fiction is obviously stellar. You've won the Arthur C. Clarke Award, the prestigious University of Johannesburg Prize, the August de Leith Prize, the Strand Critics' Choice Award, the Arty Thriller of the Year, the Bokondo Award. You've been honored by South Africa's Parliament. Plus, the TV rights of The Shining Girls have been acquired by MRC and Leonardo DiCaprio's Appian Way. How does all of that feel? And how does it fuel you, or does it frighten you?
So I just want to add, The Shining Girls is actually, they're finishing filming in Chicago this month with Elizabeth Moss and Kenny Bell and Wagner Moura from Narcos. And if we weren't living in the Panini or the Panorama or the Pandora, then I could actually fly out and watch them. But they send me some pretty cool photographs. But it terrifies me. Thank you. It's all terrifying. It doesn't feel real. 6 novels down and I still have imposter syndrome. I still think I suck. I still look at the page and go, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And obviously that's not true, because I have all these books and apparently I've won these prizes, but it doesn't feel real. I think it's important to stay humble. And I think the important thing for me is I take the work seriously, but I should never get to the place where I take myself too seriously. Which is why, I like to make jokes about how to pronounce my name, for example. It's Beukes, rhymes with mucus.
Well, I say my surname is like Nakuru with a G, so there's a city here called Nakuru. Yeah, you find the little things. But I mean, I hear that for sure, because as an artist, you are, you are putting yourself out there for the world to judge you, consume your art, to say it is worthy. And yes, at some point when one award comes in, they follow, because they're like, oh, they must be good. But I know for sure that they are all the awards that you have are they are hard won and they are deserved. And I wonder, how do you keep going? How do you keep staying in that wonderful space that's bizarre and wonderful, and keep pushing? And I think you've kind of hinted at it, at taking yourself seriously, but how do you do that after all these wonderful ideas? And how do you know what's meant to be a film, not meant to be a film, but what's meant to be a comic, what's meant to be a short story? How do you distinguish when the ideas come, what goes where?
I don't know. I think some things are just more short story-ish. With TV shows, we've just pitched an original horror show, which is hopefully going to get picked up. But I co-wrote it with 2 of my friends, which was absolutely wonderful, because suddenly you're not carrying the entire burden by yourself. You're collaborating and you're in a writer's room and you're riffing and sparking off other people, and that's amazing. And also like working with other people when I'm actually pretty good, I'm like, oh yeah, you actually are good at your job. You actually do know what you're doing. You do know how to solve this story. But when you're sitting there by yourself in front of the keyboard, you're just like, what is happening here? I don't even know how to deal with this.
Yeah.
But I think I have a foolish amount of ambition. My new book is so freaking complicated, and I'm in the rewrites at the moment. The ending is a disaster, and I've got to fix everything, and it's fine because I think it might be my most interesting book. It might also be a terrible commercial failure because it's so complicated. But I'm never going to keep writing the same thing. I want to, when people ask, who do you write for? Who is your ideal audience? I'm writing for me and for people like me, where I really want to be surprised by a book, where I want the book to take me somewhere I hadn't anticipated, where, if it is a life or, I think a book is a kind of a house that you inhabit. The story is a home that you inhabit for a while, and then you take a piece of it away with you. And what is the shape of that? Like, what do I want that to be? I want it to be surprising. I want it to push boundaries. I want it to have something to say about the world. Yeah. And I think what it comes down to is my own curiosity. I'm curious, I'm engaged, I'm angry about injustice, and I bring all of that and all the questions I have about the world, and I kind of thrash it out through the book. So this new one is about, multiple realities, and it's about a young woman trying to find her mother who's disappeared into one of the other realities. And it's about being paralyzed by choice, and it's about having all these different versions of yourself. And is this one superior? Did you make the right choice? Because I think so many of us, I think especially if you have a slashy life where you're a journalist and a TV writer you're like, am I making the right choice by taking this pathway? Should I have broken up with that person? Should I have stayed in the city? And you're constantly questioning yourself. But I think for me, the core theme of this book comes back to the choices that we do make and how to stand by them, and the life that you've chosen. That's not to say you can't make horrible mistakes and walk them back and like figure stuff out, but I think it's really important to be present here and to kind of own where you are.
Interesting, because I was going to ask you, do you have an impulse to correct some wrongs in your work? Because here you are the god, and here's an opportunity to a vast, empty world in which you can put all these wonderful things together, and you create a world, or whether you create a place where you break with stereotype, you challenge, you subvert things, you challenge things that exist as they are. How do you lean into that, and how far do you lean into that?
So, with Maverick, we re-released it recently, and I went back and, I wrote it in 2005. So that's a long time ago. And thank God the world has moved on, and the way we talk about everything from sexual assault to body image has moved on. And there were some throwaway lines which were completely acceptable at the time, but I reread them like, oh my God. There was this artist, Irma Stern, who was relentlessly teased at the time for being fat. And because that was coming up in my research, I used that. But then I had the chance to correct it, and Dalia Ratebe talking about, she was an amazing singer. She was the first African Black movie star in Jim Comes to Joburg. And in the research materials I was using, they talked about, young women being kidnapped by gangsters for a night of fun, meaning rape. Yeah. But I wrote it down as a night of fun. And I was like, no, like that was absolutely sexual assault. There's nothing saucy or like cute about this. It was horrifying. And just because we normalized it at the time and normalized it even then, so I think there is absolutely an opportunity to learn and progress with the world and to correct things. Last year with my novel Afterland, which is a world where 99%, so the premise is that 99% of the male population have died. And I didn't want to base it on chromosomes, because chromosomes are actually much more complicated than we think. A lot of, there are people with XXY chromosomes, and I didn't want to base it on testosterone because some women have very high testosterone, some men have very low testosterone. And I think also, the horrendous racism and sexism we see with someone like Casa Semenya being like, just bullied out of competing because she has high testosterone is ridiculous. So I decided to make a prostate cancer. But then some trans woman activists on Twitter called me out about it. And they were like, listen, this is actually incredibly painful. And these are all the things that you got wrong. And here's some like really damaging language that you're using. No, I hadn't picked it up. And I think of myself as quite progressive, and I aim to be an ally in all things. And my editors hadn't picked it up. My friends who'd read it hadn't picked it up, but we weren't that group. You know, we weren't that minority group. We weren't sensitized to it. So with the paperback release, we actually went back and I changed a bunch of things that I agreed with were hurtful. And I spoke to activists. I hired 2 sensitivity readers and I got them to go through it, a trans man and a trans woman. And I looked at their suggestions. I spoke to a trans doctor in Cape Town who's also herself trans and the leading gender reassignment doctor to find out where I'd gone wrong and to learn how to do better. And I think that is important. I think it's okay to own your mistakes. And especially if you're hurting someone, especially if you're hurting someone who's already suffered so much.
Oh, that's horrible. I mean, obviously, it's not the, I'm happy that you've done it, but it also would be wonderful that is the way of the world, because people are so stubborn and okay with being wrong instead of doing the right thing. And it's really wonderful what you've done. So kudos to you for having that spirit. You've already hinted it a bit, but collaboration is something that you've mentioned very, very joyfully. Can you talk about some of the magical collaborations you've engaged in the past across all the work that you do?
Absolutely. So it kind of started with an animated TV series in South Africa called Urbo, The Adventures of Pax Africa. And we started, I was a writer and we started with a director and 4 animators, and eventually the team grew to 100 people and we were putting out a half-hour episode every week. And it was the first half-hour animated show in Africa. But it was so fun, and we'd have, you know, so I hired like these brilliant other writers, and we had this writers' room, we'd be riffing off each other, but then we'd also work with all the other teams because everything was being done in-house. So you had everything from the storyboard through to the 3D animation, the 2D animation, the voice effects, you know, the actors coming to record. And that collaboration and seeing how people brought different aspects to things was so exciting and so thrilling, and also really made me think, it taught me to think visually. Because I had to describe something that someone could draw it. But, you know, sometimes the animators would like draw a character in a particular way or have a particular quirk, and you're like, oh my God, now I actually understand who this character is. Or the voiceover artist would come in and deliver the line in a way that you hadn't expected. And you're like, oh my God, no, that's completely right. And actually I need to change some dialogue because this is the way the character should be. And I think that's where I learned to accept that sometimes you're wrong. And as long as people are making it better or more interesting, then like, absolutely. And it's the same with working in comics, like seeing someone draw something that you've written. And again, like the way the character's expression is, and it can just reveal so much to you that you hadn't actually realized, because so much of writing is a subconscious process. And as soon as you have someone else interpreting that as well, you're like, oh, right, that's what I was trying to do. And that's actually a much more interesting direction, and like, let's go that route. And that's, for me, thrilling.
Speaking of direction, you directed a documentary, didn't you? Glitter Boys and Ganglands, a documentary about 14 contestants battling out for the title of Miss Gay Western Cape, South Africa's biggest female impersonator pageant. How did you find Kate, Eva, and Kaden? How long did you shoot them? And why direct a documentary to begin with?
So the animation company I was working for was looking to branch out into other kinds of TV as well. We also did a lot of sports shows, which obviously I have no interest in. And I was loving RuPaul's Drag Race. We found out about Miss Gay Western Cape. And so we went along to just film like a little short piece and see if we could get anything. And I used all my journalism skills. And so it was a kind of a pre-event. It was part of the judging process where the judges got to sit down with each contestant. And then we got to sit down with a lot of the contestants. And it was immediately apparent who stood out and who I wanted to kind of engage with, and who had the most, and again, what you're looking for is most interesting stories, but also people who know how to tell their stories about themselves. So, you know, Kat was like everyone pegged her as she was going to win, and she has this boyfriend who makes all her dresses for her. Kaden, there was a lot of controversy about her because she is actually a trans woman, and she hasn't gone through surgery yet, but she's on hormones. And, you know, some people were like, well, that's unfair because the rest of us aren't. And then Eva was just the most amazing, interesting kind of mechanic / ballroom dancer with this incredible life story and enduring like terrible hardship, but so engaging and so interesting. And they just shone out immediately. So we only actually shot probably for 2 weeks. You know, so we spent as much time as we could with each contestants at their homes and then filmed the big nights. So it was really cobbled together on like, I think a budget of 150,000 Rand, and just very, but it was, you know, like very kind of down and dirty, but I think the stories which came out of it were so interesting. And also just the glitz and the glamour. And God, I gotta tell you, like being surrounded by like all these incredibly glamorous, you know, it's a female impersonation beauty pageant, which is how they describe it. So female impersonators, but also drag queens and trans women. I was looking at them and I'm like, damn it, why do you have much better legs than me? And why is my butt not
oh
like
my
that?
God, that's what I feel. I always feel like, yeah, you do better than me. I'm like, you make me feel like I'm doing so badly as a woman. Like, but also what I love about it is that it shows you like how many ways there are to be a woman, whatever that concept is, whatever that gender, whatever that thing is. But the way they express that joy and the fact that they're so happy to wear heels, I'm like, okay, if they can do it, well, I'll try then.
But power to them. I can't do it to save my life. I'm a sneakers girl.
But then you go back to some documentary stuff, like what you want to do film? Are you interested in doing more in that space?
I'd love to do more. I'd love to do more animation. I'd love to do more directing. So I think that's kind of where I'm heading. I'm probably looking at moving to the UK just because much more of my career is there, and I'll be able to do more TV writing. And I think with the pandemic, it's been really difficult because, you know, I think, as you know, as an international artist, like you really need to be able to go to the events, you need to be able to go to the literary festivals, to sign the books, and yeah, and to be in the writer's room, to be able to do kind of more of that kind of thing. I'd love to do more documentary work. I really, really enjoyed it, and I miss journalism as well. You know, I mean, now I do journalism in the aid of, you know, I do interviews and exploration and adventures towards writing a book, but yeah, I gotta say, like the one thing is that, you know, as I'm not sure about what the tax laws are like in Nairobi, but in South Africa, as a writer, I can write off all kinds of adventure expenses as research. So I went to Antarctica in 2019, and it was the most incredible trip. It was absolutely amazing. And it was hideously expensive, but you know what? I wrote a short story about it. And now I'm pitching maybe a possible TV show about it as well. And so it's completely justified as a research expense. Maybe not all of it, but you know, definitely some of it you can claim.
Man, okay, first of all, I'm so jealous that you travel so much and you're able to just immerse yourself. And I wonder, where does that come from? Like that kind of fearlessness and just curiosity and just seeking the other and to understand the other.
I think it comes from books. But I also really want to acknowledge that I'm coming here with a lot of white privilege. You know, I didn't just grow up as a white person. I grew up as a white South African under apartheid. You know, and I had all the privileges. My parents traveled a lot. You know, I had a really, you know, top quality education. But I also, my parents they weren't activists, but they were very involved with their church, and they were very involved with starting Habitat for Humanity in South Africa and building houses. I have a Black brother who grew up in our household, Tabo, who's just the most amazing director. He does news, he's very cool. And so I had that exposure. My parents gave me that exposure. And I think also growing up in a country like South Africa, where the social issues are, you know, they're not hidden. They're like so under the surface, and it has that edge, and you have to find a way to live with it, or just kind of, you know, put on your blinkers and ignore everything. I think that really motivates where I come from, is literally where I come from, and understanding how raw the past is underneath the psychogeographies, how we're haunted by this terrible history of what's been done to people, how we find a way to live with it, how you move through that world, and kind of finding these intersections between the different levels of reality, essentially.
That's so important. And as we wrap up, sadly, because apparently time moves forward, oh my God. But I wanted to know how involved you are in the negotiation, like the non-writer, non-fun stuff. Are there things now that you've learned and that you're important for you? You're important to be in charge of these things. Are there things you become very specific about?
So I think, you know, if I'm going to boil it down to like advice, it is. So I think you have to be cheeky, and you have to write the thing that you really care about, and then you have to push it out and you have to sell it, and you're going to be rejected again and again and again, and you're going to be knocked to the ground, and you have to spit out your teeth, and you have to wipe the blood off your face, and you have to get back in the ring. But there's stuff around contracts and like having an agent, and I went through 4 literary agents before I found the right one. It's like dating. This is your business partner. They're not doing you a favor. They're not like the fairy godmother. This is your business partner that you're working with. They have to understand you and your work, and they have to know how to sell the hell out of you. I think, for me, what's been really important, and a lot of advice I give to other writers, is like looking at contracts. Like, don't give away your world rights, because if you sell your world rights to one publisher, then suddenly you can't sell them individually. So the fact that I've been published in 24 countries is because my agent pushes really hard in Hungary. And sometimes that's a really big deal, and sometimes it's a small deal. I might get $500 for Israel, or 1,000 euros from like Czechoslovakia. And it just means that, or Czech Republic rather, it just means that you have free money for nothing. So don't give away your world rights. And I understand that a contract is a negotiation. I've also, I went through a previous film manager. I've now got an amazing film manager and Hollywood lawyer, and they're an all-woman team, and they're such badasses. And they just, the number of times they've saved me from like getting involved in like kind of bad deals, or renegotiated something so it just becomes absolutely phenomenal. And suddenly we've got a 7-way bidding war on one of my books. Wow. It's really amazing. And if I look at my early contracts from when I started out in my career and what I'm doing now, because I have the right representation, because I have people who understand that, that makes all the difference. I can't begin to tell you how to forget those people. I mean, there is, for getting a literary agent, there's a book called The Writers and Artists Yearbook. And I think there's also a website, so you can go through that and like look at which agents to approach. I think it's very important to have an agent who is either in London or New York, because that is where publishing is. And I think if you're getting into international film and TV, it is vital to have an LA-based manager or agent. But I kind of lucked into getting those. I don't actually know how to approach someone.
No, but I mean, it's good to know that it's important. It's good to know that it is important sometimes, because maybe you're not there in your career yet, but you're conscious of where you're supposed to be working towards. And because we're wrapping up, sadly, I think maybe let's leave it with why you write, what keeps you going, what you hope to do, and how this thing has saved you, or has kept your hair blue.
It's actually fading at the moment. I need to get redone. No, I think storytelling just it's how we understand who we are in the world. It's stories we tell about ourselves, about our lives, about what happened to us on a walk today, or maybe you have a minor car accident. How do you talk about that? How do you see what happened to you, what you did? And that's so core to like being human, is stories. And to be able to be paid for that to be my career, to like make stuff up and find stories that kind of people engage with and are so very me. I'm not writing about, I don't know, a long detective series about like a cozy detective novel in the UK. Like my stories are like my weird brain, but also all of the world that I've taken into my weird brain and kind of tried to like parse out again. I had a print on my wall, which is of I bought it from Comic-Con in South Africa. And it's of a young woman she's ripped her bloody heart out of her chest and she's holding it in her hand. And she's got blood over her mouth and like kind of chunks. It's like a very gory picture. But that's what writing feels like to me. It feels like you're ripping your heart out of your chest and you're taking these things which are so personal to you and that you've really worked on in like this raw art, and you're kind of presenting it to the world, bloody and hectic, but yeah. And well, I think
well, sorry for interrupting, but I was just saying really thank you for doing that. I guess metaphorically. Like, because we can't see below, I hope it's in there, but really thank you so much for proving yes one does have the heart still intact. But really thank you for doing that and putting your stories into the world in the various ways that you're doing it, and we can only hope for more. Everybody, her new book Afterland is out. Please find it and please read all her other work. find her on her website, which is herfullname.com, and just see all her amazing, amazing stuff. So thank you so much also Book Bank for this opportunity to connect and have a conversation. And I know that people watching this have learned so much and enjoyed themselves. Thank you.
And please everyone go and check out Wanjeri's website and all the amazing work that she's doing, because actually I could have interviewed her, and I hope next time I get to do that.
Thank you. Yes, we'll book it in. All right. So I think we're done, guys.
I hope everybody enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I've just been here gushing and just taking down notes and furiously writing notes as that conversation happened. I'm back, if you've already seen, and I have a bit of a surprise. Lauren is back in the building. As I mentioned earlier on, this is a pre-recorded conversation because Wanjeri is off being fabulous and making films today. So she couldn't be here in person today, but Lauren was so kind to come back and answer some of your questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A as I welcome Lauren to turn on her video and her sound. And this is a bit of a moment for me because it's been, we've actually met. I don't know if you, hey.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, I'm very well. So nice to be back again. I had a costume change. I hope you appreciate it.
Yes, I like to see that the hair is still blue. It's bookmark blue, almost. So we've actually met a few years ago when I was in grad school at UCT. I don't know if you remember, but I won't put you on the spot, but you came in to talk to my grad school seminar, and I still say to date that the advice you gave me about my writing career that was starting off then has been some of the most practical and like usable, for lack of a better word, set of skills. So I'm really, really grateful for just kind of, and I think you actually, just to be very practical, you talked to us about agents and getting an agent and applying for stuff, and the fact that no one really owes you anything, so you have to do the work. And I promise you, and I'm not making this up, I went home that evening to my little small Cape Town apartment and just, I think I started applying to everything I could find, fellowships, asking agents to represent me. I got lots of no's, but I wouldn't have started if you didn't say, give us those words. So thank you.
I'm so thrilled to hear that. I can't begin to tell you that makes everything worthwhile. Next time I'm struggling with my book, I'm going to be like, no, but like you can actually help people and inspire them. So I'm so glad. And rejection is so big a part of it. So yeah, I'm glad you got that kind of early in to all the no's.
Yeah. Thank you. So it's my honor to welcome you back. And I'm sure everybody at Book Bank is really thrilled. I'm going to get right into the questions that have come in on socials and here as well. We can start with a chat. And I'll just go to the very first one that Jabari had, which I think is excellent. I'll read it out for you real quickly. What measures do you take when speaking for a group that you don't necessarily represent, but include in your work to maintain the authenticity, or what measures do you take to maintain the authenticity of their lived realities and that they still have a voice?
I think it's so important because I think it's so easy to get horribly, horribly wrong. So I started with Zoo City, where, you know, the protagonist, Zinzi December, is a Black woman. And even back then as a white writer, I was like, oh, do I have the right to write this story? Like, how am I going to make sure I don't screw this up? So I hired my friend Zukiswa Wana, who's an amazing novelist herself, but also just a huge advocate for African literature. And she's complete badass. If you don't know her work already, please go check it out. Yeah. And I asked her to read the novel and give me kind of, you know, a cultural read and just make sure that it was representative and authentic. And she came back with like 7 pages of notes, and we went through them systematically. And, you know, one of the notes was like, okay, well, you're not going to buy, Hillbrow's all about the cheap ripoff. So you're not going to buy a Peter Stuyvesant on the street. You're going to buy a Remington Gold. I was like, okay, that's amazing. And actually those plastic rattan bags are actually called Amashangan. I was like, okay, that's amazing. Write that down. And we got to the end of her notes and I said, okay, Zooks, that's great, but you haven't actually answered my big question. And she's like, well, what's your big question? And I was like, okay, well, oh God, is there any way to say this without something stupid? I was like, okay, is Zinzi Black enough? And she burst out laughing and she said, what is Black enough? Is there only one way of being Black? She's like, have you written a character who is informed by her background, by her experiences, by her gender and her sexuality, by the things that she's been through? And does that read as an authentic, fully formed person? Yes. And of course there are references to the ancestors and Isangoma and Nyasa, and and I checked with people as well to like just make sure that I got it right. And of course some of that stuff is still fictionalized and I'm playing with it, but it is really important to me to try and represent people accurately. And sometimes I get it wrong, and then I get corrected and I try to fix it and do better the next time. And I think that's a tough thing, is to admit when you were wrong.
I agree, especially when you're dealing with such sensitive matters. I wrote a book about post-election violence, and it's the thing you can't, it's a national kind of piece of trauma, so you don't want to get those things right, and when you do, you have to apologize because you're dealing with people's realities. So I hope that answers your question. One more question in the chat: what has been your experience in marketing your books in Africa, outside of South Africa? Good one.
Really cool events like this. But really, that's it. I don't think we have enough of a flow within the continent. And I think that's really tragic. And I'd love to see kind of more, just African focused literary festivals. And of course, there are a couple. The one in Nigeria, whose name I cannot think of right now because it's late on a Friday afternoon. So there are some like really cool, amazing festivals, but I think we just need more of it. We need to like share our own voices more, as opposed to being the African writers now up on the one exclusive panel at the, Sydney Book Festival, because all African writers are the same, right?
Yes. I agree. And really, this is why we're here. But like this needs to happen more. We've truly missed a Nairobi Literature Festival. So it's completely it's magic that this is happening. And next year, maybe you can come back and just be sitting in our library and having this conversation with a live audience.
I would absolutely love that. I'd love to come to Nairobi. And I just want more of that kind of, exchange. And I think especially just not just Africa, but across the global South.
Completely. I agree. There's one question. This one is from me. And you said that when you're writing, and I completely agree, you kind of have to give it your all. You have to make sure that you're interested in the thing for a really, really long time. Yeah. But I wonder if there are things that you had to, like, how do you draw boundaries? Or is writing a completely boundaryless sport for you? Are there some things that are off limits?
I don't know if there are things which are off limits. I don't know. I think I just write what interests me, and I kind of follow that through to the end, or close enough to the end, and I'm really sick of editing it and everyone else seems to think it's okay. I'm very happy to let it go into the world. But are there subjects I wouldn't write about? Only I think in that they bore me. So I wouldn't write about rugby, or, I don't know, like a very straightforward rom-com. There would have to be some kind of strange thing happening. I do think I could write more romance. I think that'd be pretty cool, but yeah. But I do try to be careful when writing about other people's experiences, and to really kind of be as inclusive as possible. And I aim to be intersectional.
Thank you. The Q&A is blowing up a little bit over here. Anonymous asks, in Afterland, a world where almost all men are dead, I was hoping for a sort of utopia. Why did you choose to portray women as the villains?
Because, this is not a utopia from the ground up. This is based on our, it's only 2 or 3 years after the end of Men. So the wounds of capitalism are still the wounds. We're still like coming out of a capitalist patriarchal state, and it's not immediately going to get better. And I also wanted to kind of explore this idea that women are just as capable of being evil as men are. We don't necessarily have the same high testosterone levels, although some women do. But we're just as capable of being evil and being drug dealers and being, human traffickers and greedy and selfish and corporate bastards. And, from Melania Trump to the woman who was, I can't remember her name, who was heavily involved in the Rwandan genocide, who was at the sports stadium broadcasting for people to come and be murdered. And I think what I really wanted to play with was this idea of women as full people, and to kind of play with your expectations around that and subvert the narrative around, this time it's the teenage boy in peril instead of the teenage girl in peril, and the human traffickers are after him instead of after a girl. But yes, I do. But at the same time, I do also think that a world of women would be a better place. It would be safe to go out at night. It would be safer to go out, and we could actually, I do think we're more socially minded. I think we're socialized to be that way. But at the same time, crime, drug addiction, corporate greed, none of that stuff's going to go away overnight. So I wanted to kind of play in a world where that was still relevant, and to show that, women are full human beings too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I agree that some of the best criminals are women, because also women barely get caught. So I do agree with you. Balance. Are
we going to start a criminal enterprise here?
I like the sound of that.
That's a great idea for
I would do it. It would be like social impact crime, if there's anything, and find a way to spin it. Angela Washuka is asking when you're coming to Kenya. She's also the one to answer that question, because this is her festival too. So we are.
When am I coming to Kenya, Angela?
When is she coming to Kenya, Angela? And then the second last question we will take, I don't want to take up too much of your Friday. I know you've already given us so much of your time. How long does it usually take you to write a book, and how do you overcome writer's block? You've answered this before in other sessions, but please, for this attendee, how do you overcome writer's block?
So you kind of have to sneak around the block. You either like chip your way through it, and you sit down and you write anyway, even though you're hating every single second of it. And there's a great talk by the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She gives a really great TED talk about how the muse shows up after you've already sat your butt in the chair and done 2 hours of work. And then, like a Catonian late to a dinner party, the muse swans in and is like, oh, were you waiting for me? But you got to park your butt, and you just got to write, even though you hate it, even though it's the worst, and just keep writing, because at some point it'll catch. It's like trying to make a fire, and you might be sitting there with the flint and the tinder for ages, but eventually it will spark and it will catch. But you have to sit there trying to make the fire first.
I agree. And a thing that I do as well when I'm experiencing writer's block is just I leave the section I'm writing on and I go somewhere else. I'm like, okay, chapter 3 is then landing. Let me go work on chapter 7, because that one is clearer in my mind. And then you can come back. So I think also just playing around with form and doing the things you need to do to unlock it is completely it. Reading poetry for me really works, or short things. You have to go through it.
But you're right, like getting away from it, like not just getting away from that chapter. I mean, you can also do tricks like writing in the second person, or writing the chapter from a different character's point of view, but also just going for a walk, and just letting, like, being in your body and being outside and kind of feeling the world and not actively thinking about the problem gives your brain downtime to kind of process it. And the other thing I do, which really helps me, because I'm a terrible employee because I slack off all the time, and I'm also a terrible boss because I let myself get away with it. But is I join Zoom writing sessions with my friends, and I've got their little faces staring at me in the window, and they're writing, and I'm like, okay, fine, I guess I'm also writing. God.
That's a good one. I am definitely not a writer's writer, and I need to. I'm hoping to change that and find more community, because I just want to be in my head. But that kind of like community you build out of having somebody being like, just how many pages? Just do one more this week, and then you'll be fine.
Absolutely.
That's also really important, and something that I really missed since moving back to Nairobi from grad school at UCT.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to compress the next two because I think they're equally important. It's both about African and South African culture and writing. So in what ways has the South African culture influenced your writing? Has it shaped your work? And part B would be, are there any other writers in your genre from the continent that you're excited by?
Definitely. So I think I'm very influenced by growing up as a white South African under apartheid, and growing up in the midst of this political turmoil and also grave social injustice, this murderous racist regime. So that's really kind of informed where I'm coming from and the social issues that I'm very finely aware of and that come through in my work. In terms of like South African writing influence, I don't think there's, I think I read pretty widely. But writers I'm excited about from the continent, there are a bunch of people whose names I'm now all going to forget, but I'll try hard not to. Tate Thompson, who wrote Rosewater, who won the Arthur C. Clarke Award. He's British Nigerian. He's absolutely phenomenal. Nnedi Okorafor, obviously, I think is a name that gets thrown out a lot, but she's also just an absolute delight. And we had a really fun time hanging out with her when she was in Cape Town. Mahali Mashiko is one of my best friends, and she's a goddamn genius. Her short story collection, Intruders, is wonderful. She's also done a really cool new Captain America character for Marvel. And she's also doing like really interesting comics work. Masunda Nchanga, his book The Reactive is amazing. Triangulum, also weird science fiction. So I think there's some really interesting, exciting voices coming out, you know, all the time. New Zimbabwean writer, well, not new, but like new to speculative fiction. Tendai Huchu has got a kind of fantasy novel set with Black characters in Edinburgh, which has just come out. It's called something Library, but that looks really fun. So I think there's just much more room to write speculative stuff in the African market. And I think the international world is more open to it as well. But I think, you know, being from the continent, you know, publishing is hard, and you're lucky if you get published. You're lucky if you reach like a big audience. Oh, the one cultural thing, which I think is really important being South African and African, is the fact that, you know, you can sit with this incredibly high tech world and like business and corporate and all the rest of it, in this very kind of, you know, modern world. But the fact that we have like very traditional beliefs around the spirits of the ancestors and traditional healers, and these two things can sit side by side, you know, so you have this kind of real world of deep traditional beliefs and magic and sitting together with science and modern technology. And the fact that that's not a split, it's not, you can't have one or the other, you can actually have both. There's a really cool young paleontologist at the Wits Origin Center, you know, so she's a hardcore human scientist, and she's also a Sangoma. And I'm like, yep, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
The same way you can be Catholic and a scientist, you know, it's just, it's fine to like have, you know, these different belief systems.
Completely. There's room for all of us. We're vast and like expansive beings. There's room to try things on and to explore them and to walk away. Especially that is important to mention.
Absolutely.
So what is incredible. My book is called The Havoc of Choice.
Okay.
It's actually the feature of the next session, so I actually need to go and switch my head from like host to author and get the next sessions. But I wrote it at UCT. Actually, Masande, who you mentioned as one of your favorite writers, and I were in the same. We had the same supervisor and were 1 year apart. So I completely echo your sentiment about his work. But yes, please log in for the next session and see me in a different kind of light. But for now, I'm so grateful for you taking time to come back to have that wonderful conversation with Wanjeri and to just support the work we're trying to do around public libraries. We really hope to host you in person soon. That's all the questions we have time for. I'm sorry to the audience who still have some questions. Lauren is all over Twitter and she's so responsive. So with your permission, I can ask our audiences to come and reach out to her. There's lots of love on Twitter and Facebook. We have an audience. Hello, Facebook, by the way. We have an audience on Facebook as well. And in closing, I just want to thank all the people that made this possible. The Sharjah World Book Capital, who supported BookBank's work for so long and in such generosity. Sigrid Rousing Trust, Levels of the Culture, the Embassy of Nairobi here, Embassy of the Netherlands here in Nairobi, and all my wonderful colleagues at BookBank who are working to make this festival run. It's the first time we're doing this, and I think it's going to be the first of many. So thank you so much for joining us. This is the 8th event of 12. So I might be lying about that number. I think we have more. I think there's 15 events. But please join us for the next one coming up now and all day tomorrow. My name is Wanjeri Koinange. I am a co-founder at BookBank, and I've been your host for this session. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.